everyone, I'm Teresa Marzoff with Culture Engineered, and I'm here with you today with your weekly update. This month we've been talking about hiring and we're answering some of the most commonly asked questions from our clients. And this week we're answering the question, should we drug test employees as part of our hiring process? So let's get started. If you're considering incorporating drug and or alcohol, any type of substance testing as part of your hiring process, you're definitely not alone. A 2011 SHRM study showed that 57% of employers drug tested. However, many people believe that this is actually something that is going backwards. So maybe it's already peaked, and actually less companies are doing drug testing as a part of their hiring process. And there's some reasons as to why people believe that. One is the changing social climate and attitude as it relates to illegal drugs and prescription drugs. So a Gallup study showed that 66% of those surveyed last year believed that marijuana should be legalized. Now this is up from when they first started doing this study in 1970, up 54%. So think of 1970 and the attitudes then. I was shocked by this. And now it's higher than ever. It's progressively gone up each year, meaning people are more and more comfortable with the idea of making marijuana legal. Now, Gallup also did ask a question of survey participants around the opioid epidemic. And when participants were asked, the majority of participants believed that the opioid epidemic is primarily due to pharmaceutical companies and doctors. So again, this is kind of shifting the whole historical view of drugs, drug usage, prescription usage, suggesting a different attitude, and that likely translates over to the employer attitude and how employers are handling pre-hire drug screens. Another thing is low unemployment and companies looking to enhance or widen their pool of candidates. So historically, this is drug screening, and drug screen results was something used to narrow your pool of candidates, right? So now when it's already somewhat of a narrow pool, it's believed some employers are looking for ways to make more and more candidates eligible to work with their organization and stop, their previous attitude of narrowing that pool. And then the third and final reason that this trend is believed to maybe, companies are taking a step back and moving away from doing pre-hire drug screening is the complexity. We have many clients that have multiple locations or remote employees in other states besides where they're headquartered. You probably have the same situation. Now with drug screening and drugs that are legal and not legal and how to handle that, it can vary state by state. So this makes it very hard, especially for small and mid-sized businesses, to really regulate this component. And so for those companies maybe not investing as much stock in this idea, they're stepping away from just an added complexity to running their business. Now, there's still a lot of credible arguments as to why some companies feel pre-hire drug screening is critical to their success. There's one primary reason is some groups suggest that drugs are on the rise. So a 2016 study published by Quest Diagnostics, a very well-respected and I should say popular, drug testing company, shows that more U.S. workers tested positive for drugs in 2016 than than the previous 12. This is, concerning and alarming to many employers that, as again, this attitude toward drugs maybe goes through our community or just environment. It's also changing people's behaviors as to how comfortable they are consuming drugs. Maybe more people are in fact using them. And then there's also another study put out by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that reports a 32% increase on the job overdoses from non-medical use, and then also a 25% increase in workplace fatalities related to overdoses. So again, a very big concern to many employers, especially when the second reason that many companies still feel that pre-hire drug screening is important, it has been found to be a pretty high correlation between substance usage and workplace incidents. So just a couple of facts for you here. Based on a study put out by the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, workers with alcohol problems were 2.7 times more likely than workers without drinking problems to have injury-related absences. A hospital emergency room department showed that 35% of patients with an occupational injury were at-risk drinkers. And then also analyses of workplace fatalities showed that at least 11% of the victims had been drinking. Now, this is especially important as an employer to consider, because remember, not only those under the influence are the ones that can get hurt. I've had many incidents in my career, as unfortunately many leaders have, where innocent parties, whether it's customers or co-workers of that individual, also get hurt. And don't forget to remember the business impact. Penalties that are associated with injuries or worse, fatalities are expensive. Workers' comp rates go up, and then also the families of those that are injured. So again, those are some real concerns that folks have and why they continue a lot of times to keep pre-hire screening in their business. So let's discuss the culture engineer approach to deciding whether or not drug screening is right for your pre-hire process. I have a few steps for you. Step 1, identify the legal implications. So as we discussed, federal and state laws can vary. It can also vary based on your industry. For example, the Department of Transportation has some very specific requirements around drug and alcohol testing for DOT or Department of Transportation type positions. So you'll need to adhere to those. Step 2 then is identify the goal. Why do you want to have this? What do you think it's going to solve by having this pre-hire screening? Is it to reduce safety incidents? Maybe you have a bad safety record and you think that if you were testing people on the front end, they would likely fail those tests and you would not have had those incidents in your organization. Or is it financial? You want to reduce your workers' comp rates and you learned from your agent that if you have a workplace substance-free workplace policy, you'll automatically get a reduction. That's something to consider. Step 3 then is assess whether or not it's consistent with your culture. So remember, each change that you make, each policy, each decision you make related to your workforce is either enhancing or taking away from your employee experience. So if you already have existing employees, I highly recommend identifying how they feel and view drugs in the workplace before going into this, without considering their already existing perceptions. While you may be a leader of the organization, you already have an existing culture here. So be prepared to explain your decision and get some negative feedback around it if it's different from what your culture has been consistent with before. Step 4 then is design the test to meet your goals. So like we talked about before, you'll need to identify your goal and then really find the test right for you if you decide it's right for you at this point. You'll want to engage a trustworthy lab. They can help you a lot with this process. And you'll need to decide a few things like what type of panel do you want to do? Do you want a 5-panel drug test, a 8, 10? Are you again just doing the DOT regulation type of drug test? What type of panel you do will largely dictate the types of drugs you're testing for in a system. And again, do what is consistent with the laws that you have to adhere to. You'll want to determine what type sample. DOT would specify this for you, but do you want to do, if you're not DOT regulated, hair, blood, saliva, breath, it's really your call, and you'll need to identify that. The frequency, are you just doing it upon hire? Are you doing random, suspicion? What about positions? Is it just safety sensitive positions? Is it everybody? How about how are you going to handle a refusal to test? You will get that. Or how do you handle a positive test? So a lot to consider. You'll want to do that before you roll this out. And then step 5, identify and train responsible parties. If you are a Department of Transportation industry or you have those positions within your workplace, you'll need to identify a medical review officer, and you will need to closely work with that person. There is a law on the DOT website. I highly recommend taking a look at that at the very least, if that applies to you, and then engaging an expert, because there really are a lot of requirements and specifications around that. Otherwise, still give consideration, because there's a lot of understanding, training, and communication that goes around successful pre-hire drug screening, and you'll want to make sure that you're adhering to all that, or else you're putting yourself at more risk than preventing it. So keep that in mind. So these are some tips to get you started. If you need more help or have additional questions on how to shape your hiring process, please reach out to Culture Engineered. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Thanks so much.